This is the Brattlecast. I'm Jordan Rich, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with my good friend Ken Gloss of the Brattle Bookshop on West Street in Boston, known round the country, round the world for amazing books and great stories about them. And today, we're going to focus on a New Englander who's famous across the globe, Robert Frost. And you've got a Robert Frost moment to share.
Well, a lot of the times now, if you went back 30, 40, 50 years, my father had the store, I had it, and the way we would get books, people would call on the phone, and they'd be moving, someone died, an estate, whatever. We'd get a call on the phone, and we'd try to talk to the people and say, well, what type of books do you have? What kind of books do you have? Try to get a sense on the phone of whether it was well worth going out. If the people lived a long way away, you might ask them to send a description of it or maybe take a photograph. And, obviously, if you have to take a photograph at that point, you had to have good light. The camera had to have a good lens. You had to take the picture. Then you had to send the film out to get developed. Maybe make 2 copies so that you had an extra one. Then mail us a copy. Then we would either call or write back. That's a long, long involved process. Nowadays, a lot of times when we don't even get that initial phone call. People will just email us and they'll send pictures of books. And which is fabulous because that at least gets us an idea of what they actually have. And it can be almost anywhere in the world. It doesn't make any difference. But also, even if it's relatively close, let's say an hour or 2 away, if you're going to make an appointment, you get a lot better idea. Anyways, we had a man call up, and he said he had a couple of books of Robert Frost. And we said, fine, Robert Frost is good. And he had sent a picture or 2, and the books were early editions. From the pictures he sent, there were things you had to check this page and that page. Were they really the first editions? That we couldn't quite tell, but we knew they were early editions. But then he sent a picture, and on each one of them, on the first end paper, which is the first time you open it, there's a whole poem. Well, a whole stanza of a poem. Now, one of the things that I was talking with one of the buyers at the store, when I first heard about this, because this one they actually had called first, and I said, send pictures. I said, how are we doing with Robert Frost? And both of our conclusions were, more people are calling to sell than people are calling to buy. It's a little bit generational. The people who grew up with Robert Frost, knowing Robert Frost, reading Robert Frost, him being the poet at the inauguration of Kennedy, and so on, they're the ones selling, whereas the younger poets, the younger readers, they know Frost, but not quite as much. So we're saying, well, let's see what they have. And the person had just said, have a signed book. Robert Frost was very, very free with his signature. He signed lots. He gave lots of readings, lots of lectures. He taught at Amherst College and other colleges, and he was very generous with it. But from the picture and so on, it's less likely that you're going to get a stanza. And it was interesting because also one of the books they told us they had was called A Boy's Will. That's Robert Frost's first really published book. Now, we knew that it wasn't the British edition, which was earlier. It was the American. And we said to the person, if you could give us a little more detail. And he finally said, well, look, I think you really have to see it. And it was summertime, and he forced me to go to Cape Cod to go take a look at the book, which, other than not wanting to go on a Friday morning to cross the bridge to get to Cape Cod from Boston, I was more than happy to drive about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, to go look at these because he had piqued the interest. He said there were 2 books. And when I got there, the first thing I looked at was, it is A Boy's Will. It is by Robert Frost. there were a couple of tiny little typographical things that told you whether it was the very first, little later. Turned out it was a little later, but there was a stanza of the book at the front. It absolutely was Robert Frost's handwriting. It was a stanza from a poem called Fire and Ice. Now, the interesting thing about it is this book was published in 1915. Fire and Ice is actually a poem that Frost had read Dante and used that as his poetry towards talking about Dante. But the first time this poem was ever printed was in 1920. So Frost, it obviously had worked out this whole poem at least 5 or 6 years earlier and had been reading and writing it down. And it was really nice. And then the other book we had here was the Mountain Interval. Again, another early book. Not quite the very first, done in 1921, and the poem was called Dunes, and it was about sand dunes, but it was an illustrative of nature and people and how fragile things were, but another whole poem all written out. And again, that one wasn't published for another 5 years.
Now, my question for you is: he wrote the stanza in the book. Was he writing it for someone when
Well,
he signed the book? Is that the way that worked? Or?
yeah, well, sometimes, yeah, he was writing it for Mr. Strauss,
Okay.
and who was, I think, a professor or maybe in the administration at Amherst College.
Okay. Okay.
So, and this was a relative of the person who had the book now. And what this person, I think, was a little worried is that eventually, if something happened to him, nobody would pay attention to it, and he thought it was time to let it go. So, what the technology did for us was I basically gave him an offer, which was into the thousands of dollars. And before I made the trip down to Cape Cod, we pretty much had a deal done. And I said, well, I'm going to have to see it. And I don't really want to have you have to put it in the mail. He had said that he'd be willing to drive up to Boston at a time. But I like these things to go
Right.
quickly once we've come there. And so the old book, over 100 years old, with a handwritten stanza of a poem in it, the modern technology really helped and made it easier. And that happens to us
Yeah.
a fair amount now.
I just have one question about the frequency of a famous writer to do something like that. How often have you seen something like that on the inside
Fro-
cover?
Frost did it occasionally, and what a lot of times with Frost, he would usually do it for somebody that he knew a little bit better, or they maybe were a little bit more important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of writers nowadays, where you get their signatures, is at these signings. And if you can get a signature that you can actually read their name because they've got a big long line, you're very lucky. Um, I think these larger signatures where an author is really writing out an inscription to somebody are much, much rarer than signing it. Even adding a date or a place is rare because it takes longer and it's more work. But getting a real inscription, that's much, much more personal, much more intimate, and usually, for most of the authors, is also makes the collector want it all that much more. And because it shows a lot more of the intimacy, and you can hold this book and say, Robert Frost wrote out a whole stanza, and it's that connection with the signature, the writing, that makes the collector want to buy it.
And 110 years have gone by, and it's very, very special because of that. Folks, you've been listening to the Brattlecast. Don't forget to check the website, brattlebookshop.com. And as we always say, Ken, ideas come from all sources. I mean, you've got them all over the place, but you're always looking for more ideas to follow up on.
We're always looking for more ideas, and with computers, the internet, photographs, a lot of the communication is made easier. but it's still the stories. It's still the personal contact. It's still smiling at something when you get it, or the personal, the touching, the holding. It's still important.
Good deal. Stay tuned. There'll be more coming up on the next Brattlecast.